listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What is up, and welcome along to the Straight to Video podcast. How have you been doing? If I'm sounding a little ropey, I've been struck down with a lousy cold, not the dreaded COVID, because my test came back negative, but I picked up something somewhere, so I either sound a little off, or maybe a little sexy with some gruff in my voice, I'm not sure, but more than likely the former. But anyway, thanks for listening, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Today on the show, I have someone I have huge amounts of respect for, just the way this guy is professional to a T, but still 110% rock and roll. And if I was to trace things back, then my guest today, Michael Thomas, has played a big part in some of my rock and roll touring adventures over the years, and more importantly, being an instigator of it. Michael is one of those guitarists from the Hollywood hard rock scene who other bands can rely on. He's the go-to guy along with dudes like Ryan Roxie, Kerry Kelly, and more recently Ace Von Johnson. When a band needs someone to step up to tour, they need someone to come in, have done their own work, look great, and put on a top show like they've been with the band all the time. Michael is that guy. I first saw Michael playing in both Bang Tango and Pretty Boy Floyd on the same bill at Nottingham's Rock City back in the mid-2000s when I was doing Trash Pit magazine. We hooked up and talked about his new project Fastback and became friends, keeping in touch and even meeting up in Hollywood where he introduced me to the cool dive bar Bordner's. Seeing Michael step up to the plate with both bands at that gig led to me contacting the US booking agent of a lot of these Hollywood bands to say if they ever needed anyone to play bass in the UK, then I was the guy, or at least I thought I could be. Well, that paid off and led me to several tours with the Bullet Boys, and what is cool for my second tour, who should be on guitar but Michael Thomas. That was a real thrill to play in the same band as this ball of energy, and we had the best time in the UK and Europe. Michael has been non-stop ever since, which we talk all about in this chat, but I also wanted to dive into his history a little, mainly because we're similar ages, and I wanted to know how it was for him moving to Hollywood at a time when our favourite music couldn't be more out of fashion, and how he rode that storm out until new opportunities presented themselves. Today, Michael continues to perform with Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses all over the world in Adler's Appetite and is as cool and professional as ever, and it was a treat to catch up. Before we dive in, a shout to Dead Skull Coffee for continuing to support the show. I stocked up last week on some of their amazing rock and roll coffee, and if you want to do the same, you can grab 15% off your order by simply adding the discount code STV on checkout over at deadskullcoffee.co.uk. You will not be disappointed and can be sure you're supporting a really cool independent business. Also, thanks to everyone who continues to support the Straight to Video Patreon. This really is a lovely little community of friends and listeners who are enjoying every episode of this show, and they also get early heads up on guests, a bonus podcast, and access to some exclusive merch. All of this can be found at patreon.com/STVpod. Alright, let's check in with MT himself. If you want to find out more about everything that Michael has done, and there's a lot of it, then visit michaelthomas19.com or on Facebook and Twitter, both of which are michaelthomas19, and he's on Instagram too, at It's Michael Thomas. I didn't have to do much in this chat, just let Michael off the leash and away he went, so I hope you enjoy my straight to video talk with guitarist Michael Thomas. So how are you?
Dude, I am great. It's so cool to see you. Like, I feel like it's been, I don't even know how long.
Mate, it's gonna be 2008.
Really? That long?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable, dude. So you're telling me no, it has to have been after that, man. Like, didn't we do a tour in Europe together with Mark and the Bullet Pigs? I want to say like in 2010 or 11?
2008.
Shit, that was the last time.
Yeah, we did the shows in, when was it? It was like July, August. Then I came to the US and there was that weird cancelled San Diego show.
Okay.
And that was the last time.
That's unbelievable.
Crazy
wow.
Stuff. So you've just been everywhere. I can't keep up with you. You're just all over the place.
Well, you know me, dude. I got to stay busy. If I don't stay busy, it's not good. I start doing stupid stuff. So the more busy I am, the safer the world is.
Yeah, nice one, man. Thank you for doing this. How are you for time, Michael? You all right for like 45 minutes?
I am good for however long you want to go, man. I left my time open for you today. It's all about Rob Lane.
Oh, I'll take that. So you in Dallas now?
I am, dude. I relocated to Dallas about 4.5, almost 5 years ago. You know, I just kind of needed a break from LA, to be honest with you. Like, I needed some new inspiration. And what was really weird, dude, is I was working on all these projects that were based here in Dallas. And it wasn't by design, it was completely by chance. So you and I were out on the road together in Europe and in the US, right? You came over here for a bit working with Mark and the Bullet Boys. And obviously you and I have our history of touring together, which I think is really amazing because I think about like all the different tours with all the different bands and all the different like incarnations of like, you know, people that we played with and different tours that we did and, you know, different combinations of bands. I mean, that spans back way until the early 2000s, I want to say, right?
You can trace everything hard rock from 80s, 90s and stuff. But there was that time in like the early-ish 2000s, mid-2000s, where everything started to bubble again. And it tried to make that pushback, I think. It was a really cool time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's where we kind of came into play, kind of, you know, the guys that we grew up listening to, we eventually ended up working with or touring with or recording with or, you know, some kind of capacity, right? So I was doing a lot of work towards like 2012, 2013 with different bands that just happened to be based in Dallas. And I don't know how that happened. Again, it wasn't by design. The first act that I was working with was a band called Anchored, and they were based here in Dallas. They were actually my opening act with Steven Adler. Back in, I want to say like 2010 or 11, they did our summer tour as the opening act. So we kept in touch and they had some success with their first record and the single that they put out with that. They went on from our tour to go out with like Saliva for a while. And then they were out with Black Label Society. And then they moved on to the Volbeat tour. So by random chance, I was in Vancouver playing a show with Steven Adler. And as I was walking out of soundcheck, I saw this poster outside on like one of the telephone poles. And it said, you know, Volbeat with Anchored. And I'm like, God, why does that band name sound so familiar? And then I looked at the date and it was the same day that we were playing, just another venue in town in Vancouver. So I'm like, I think that was our opening act from like a year ago or 2 years ago. So I called up the guys. I said, hey, are you in Vancouver? And they're like, yeah, we're playing with Volbeat. And I'm like, dude, I'm right down the street with Steven. So the craziest thing was they ended up coming to the show because theirs was earlier than ours. And we hung out, kind of caught up, had a great time. And maybe like a week later, my phone rings and it was those guys saying, hey, you know, we heard the stuff that you wrote for Steven. We're getting ready to go in and do our second record. You know, would you be interested in flying out to Texas and doing this writing session with us?
Do you think it's just you coming back into the mix there? Do you think they'd have thought of you in another context or just happened to see you and it's like, Michael's the guy for this?
It was really weird. It was like so like, I don't know. I felt like it was kind of random chance, right? It was like we had this great conversation. We caught up and then, yeah, I guess it was really weird. Their other guitar player was having an issue with making the sessions. And obviously they were out with us when we had released the single to go out with Steven's book. So we were pushing a lot of new music at that time. Yeah, it was just super random. So it happened to work with my schedule. So I flew out to Texas. And, you know, the first thing they said to me is, hey, we're doing this collaboration piece. So we're here for 10 days. We were out on this ranch in the middle of nowhere, right? And it was really cool because we were kind of secluded, but there was like the main house to this place. Then there was like this guest house. And when I say guest house, it was like a 3 or 4 bedroom house. It was converted into really like a makeshift recording studio to demo up songs for the second record. we ended up doing this song that was a collaboration with Snoop Dogg.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, it was amazing. And we eventually went on to shoot a video with Snoop and release that. So that was super cool. Anyways, I did the writing session. I came back to LA, and another 2 weeks later, they called me and said, hey man, we're getting ready to record this record. We're going to do it at NRG Studios with Jay Baumgartner, who's done like, Linkin Park, Papa Roach, No Doubt, everybody under the sun. And, it was somebody that I always wanted to work with. And they were like, hey, we've got the studio for 3 months. And this recording studio was literally less than a block from my old house. Dude. So they wanted to hire me to do the record. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's like an open checkbook to write whatever you want as far as a record is concerned. So I worked with those guys from Dallas and ended up doing that record and ended up eventually touring with them. We did the States, we did Korea, we did Japan. And then when I got home from that, just by chance got another call from a friend of mine managing this band and said, hey, I got these guys in LA and they sound kind of like something like you would have done in the past. It kind of sounds like Beautiful Creatures meets kind of Velvet Revolver. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Well, that's right up my alley. They said, yeah, they're in town, doing auditions. I think you might be a really good fit. So I said, you know what, man? I said, I'm not home right now. I happen to be in Texas with the guys from the other band. He said, well, actually, they're from Dallas. And I'm like, get out of here. And he goes, yeah, they're from Dallas. They're in LA doing auditions. Tell the guys, if they don't find who they're looking for, I'll stay a couple extra days in Texas. I'll meet them here in Dallas. So that's what ended up happening. So now I had this other band that was Dallas based. And I met these guys. We hit it off. And what was super weird, dude, about the whole thing, and again, it's funny how the universe works, is I'd finished up the record with Anchored. I'd finished that touring cycle. I kind of had wrapped up my work with those guys for the immediate future. This thing happens to fall into my lap. And they literally had a show in Dallas, I think 4 or 5 days after I met them. And then they were going overseas to go open up for Guns N' Roses when Axl had his version with I think it was Fortis. It was Tommy Stinson playing bass. DJ was playing guitar, which was weird, right? Because that's kind of my old history as well. So I ended up getting that gig and then ended up going over to India with those guys. Here I am in New Delhi, India, with this band that I just met a week earlier, and we're opening up for Guns N' Roses over there. And it was weird being there and hearing those songs and not being on the guy on the stage playing them with Steven. It was so really bizarre. So we got back from that run, and then they asked me to stay on and do their record with them. So I ended up doing that. And then they put me on retainer. So I was not only doing the band, but in our downtime in between show dates, I was basically developing new artists for the record label. So they were flying me back and forth from LA to Dallas every other week. And I did that, dude, for I don't know how long, man, 2.5 years or something, going back and forth. And finally I was like, you know what? I need to change. I need to switch it up. And I love the Dallas area. I got to know the Dallas area, all the business I was doing here. And then I also had family who lived here just by chance. I made the move. Long story short, I'm circling back around to your initial question. So yeah, I ended up moving here 4.5 years ago. And dude, honestly, for me, it was the smartest move I made in a long time, because now I'm kind of I'm in the middle of the US. So all the shows that we do these days with Steven, they're all fly dates. So my flights are an hour, maybe 2 hours max. So it's awesome because it cut down my flying time. I bought a house here last year. I feel now I've laid down some permanent roots in Texas, and I'm still in LA every couple months. I was just there for a show about, 4 weeks ago. So I don't really feel kind of homesick in that sense. I get my LA fix while I'm there, but yeah, dude, there's so much going on here in Dallas. It's unbelievable. Music wise, I feel out of LA, New York, and Nashville, I really think Dallas is kind of taking the cake as far as live music and just the whole scene, things going on here. It's off the hook, man.
You've got some really great venues there, though, of all different sizes. You've got all the stuff in Deep Ellum, you've got Trees in Deep Ellum, and then you got the House of Blues, then you go to the even bigger venue. So everybody comes through there at some point.
Yeah, it's amazing. So there's Canton Hall, the Bomb Factory, Trees, the House of Blues, Gas Monkey, Lava Cantina, probably about 30 others the new Toyota Music Factory. I saw Blackberry Smoke there about 2 months ago. The very first concert I saw there was Sammy Hagar, his group, The Circle, with Michael Anthony and Jason Bonham. And then when our friends came to town, Ricky Rocket and the guys in Poison, I went down to go say hi to those guys and caught the show. It was Poison, Cheap Trick, and I want to say Pop Evil. You've got all these great different size music venues, right? So it accommodates every type of artist that rolls through town. And then we have the Dos Equis Pavilion and a bunch of other bigger places. Obviously, the new football stadium. Well, it's not new anymore, but the Cowboy Stadium in Arlington, and the Rolling Stones just played there. Or maybe the show's coming up. Maybe it's November. Anyways, there's a lot of great music going on here.
I think it's awesome you're playing with Todd Kearns at the moment. Two of the most professional dudes which I know in the same band together.
Dude, Todd's awesome.
My first Bullet Boys tour, he was playing in Faster Pussycat.
Oh, dude, that's right. We actually had a conversation about that. That's so funny. I forgot about that. Okay, so we did the first gig together, and I want to say, God, I can't remember where that gig was, but it was like we were doing two shows in that weekend. We did a Friday night and Saturday night. And I had known of Todd for years and years and years, and he had kind of heard my name, but we never were in the same place at the same time, whether it was Vegas or out on tour working with different artists. It was really kind of funny finally like hanging out and meeting Todd. And, you know, he's such an amazing, lovely human being, incredibly talented. I have the best time playing with him. And it was so cool because when he came in to do the thing with Steven, like obviously, you know, he knows the material. So he was a natural fit. But what was great about it was we got to hang out and get to know one another after all these years of being in these similar circles, right? But never, ever being in the same room. We're driving from the Friday night gig to the Saturday gig. And I think it was like a short 2.5-hour drive. But we just had this great conversation talking about all of our previous bands and like, you know, our different people that we know, like the circle of friends. And so it was really cool, man. It was a really great way, finally, after all these years, to get to know Todd. Dude, still, we've been playing with Todd now for the past couple months. And, every weekend I come home, it's just like, man, it's so cool to have him be a part of it. Because, you know, working with Slash for so many years and playing those songs, you know, he's such a great musician to begin with, but, you know, him knowing that catalog and the feel that he brings to those and just the stage show. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos, but man, we have such a good time on stage. And it's like this nonstop energy. And what's really cool is like right out of the gate, man, like the very first show we were playing this big outdoor festival in New York. It was us and Slaughter and Great White. And I think Vixen opened the show. So it was a lot of people that we know and, you know, we enjoy hanging out with. But that very first song, man, we hit the stage running. And what was so cool is he has a lot of energy as well. And you know what I'm talking about. When you're on stage and you start crossing sides, like the minute I came over this, he automatically knew, okay, I'm going to fill this gap over here. And then we'd switch and turn around. Then we'd come and we'd rock out together. And then we'd go here and go there. It was just like the coolest natural fit. Like I didn't have to like talk to anybody or plan anything out. Like he is such a pro. And he's been doing it for so long that it's just instinctual. So yeah, I can't say enough good about old Todd Kearns. He's amazing, man. I love playing with that guy.
It's so cool, mate. It's so cool. I'm really interested in your journey and how you fitted into that old Hollywood scene at the time you were there. If it's cool just to trace a few things back, because you're originally from New York though, right?
Yeah, originally from New York and left New York and went to the West Coast when I was relatively young, like 7 or 8.
Whereabouts in New York was you from? Was you in the city or like in suburbs?
No, I wish, I wish I could say, oh yeah, New York City, you know, but it was actually like upstate New York. So a couple hours outside of the city. And I still have family that lives there. So it's cool whenever we, you know, roll through the East Coast, you know, sometimes I get some family members popping up and, you know, coming out to shows, which is awesome. But I grew up pretty much on the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Because music hit your radar really early. Did you have like a fascination for Elvis, but you were super early on the Kiss game as well, right? Even before they took the makeup off in the 80s.
Definitely. Like Kiss was one of those bands that really like got me into music, which was awesome because, you know, we did the Kiss cruise. We did the last Kiss cruise. It was Kiss. It was The Darkness. Warrant was on the bill as well. And what was great about being out on the cruise with Warrant was I hadn't seen any of those guys in a really long time. And Joey Allen was my artist rep for Hughes and Kettner, my amp company. So I've known Joey and those guys for a while, but it was the first time that we'd actually been out kind of playing on the same bill together. And what was crazy was the very first day we were hanging out Eric Turner and his wife were there. And Steven was talking to Eric, and he looked over at me and he's like, "Hey, Mr. T." He always calls me Mr. T. Long story, but so that's his nickname for me. But he goes, "Come over." Eric and his wife told me that they just moved to Dallas. And I was like, "Really?" So I had no idea that Eric was living out here. Him and his wife had built a house in the Dallas area, and their son was starting university out here. So it was really cool to see them and kind of catch up. So it was us and The Darkness and Warrant and a couple other bands. So Kiss was one of those legendary bands that got me into playing as a kid. To do the cruise and to be a part of that was amazing. And we kind of kicked off the very first night. We did like the headliner slot, like on the big outdoor stage. And of course, it's the first night of the cruise. So, everybody's up on the top deck. And it was just like one big party. And it was rad, man, because we launched into the first song. And halfway through the first song, I turn around and there's Paul Stanley standing by the side of my amp and just watching the show. And I'm like, no way, that's crazy. And then he didn't move. He sat there the entire show and watched from start to finish. And I was totally blown away, number one. Number two, nerve-wracking, because here's the guy who got you into playing music as a kid, right? And he had nothing but super cool things to say after the show when he hung out for a bit. So dude, that was absolutely amazing. So yeah, Kiss got me into music. I know when I was a kid, I had this weird, this crazy thing, whenever I heard Elvis's voice, I would literally stop as a kid. Whether it was the radio or the TV, I'd be transfixed on it, But what was really cool about moving to the West Coast, man, is at that time, there were all these bands and these players kind of coming up in the system. You may be familiar with Shrapnel Records. It's the record label that does all those real guitar virtuoso guys, Jason Becker.
All the shredding.
Shredders, right? And so that was based in the Bay Area. And what was crazy at that time was I was like a 13, 14-year-old kid, and I used to go see Jason Becker play with Marty Friedman in their old band called Cacophony. And so if you can imagine, dude, I'm this little kid going to the San Jose little civic auditorium, and there's maybe 100, 150 people there. And I'm front row center watching these virtuosos just destroy the place. I mean, to be that close and to be that young, it was so crazy, influential at the time. It just made you that more excited about playing guitar. As I got older, I started gravitating more towards bands like, Aerosmith and AC/DC. I'm not guitar shredder guy. I can get by if I need to do that for a session, but just everything that was going on with the guitar and how these guys were so spotlighted, because, Friedman went on to do Megadeth. Jason Becker went on to do an album with David Lee Roth before LS really kind of kicked in for him, So it was an amazing place to grow up because, you had these bands from the Bay, and there were the heavier stuff. I think it was Metal Church and Death Angel and Metallica. And I think Metallica went down to LA at one point, but I think the origin was the Bay Area. They would come back up to places like the Stone and the Omni, One Step Beyond, all these classic Bay Area clubs. So, I mean, it was an incredible place to kind of grow up and be exposed to music, And then when I graduated high school, I moved down to LA and started kind of work my way into the music scene there. But I mean, it was a long road, dude. I really, beat the circuit, hit the pavement for a number of years, kind of playing in multiple bands, working my way up in the food chain.
How old was you when you moved to Hollywood? Was you only 17 or something like that?
Yeah, dude, I was I was still 17. I turned 18 a couple months later.
Did you move down on your own, or did you know anybody down there?
I didn't know anybody down here, but I did move down with some friends. I wasn't completely alone. This was all a whole brand new experience. And I'd never really been to LA before. And I kind of caught the very, very tail end of a few things. Gazzari's was still in business. But I think maybe 6 months later, they kind of closed down, and then that got bulldozed and they put in, it's called One Oak, but then it was the Key Club before that. You may remember the Key Club, right? And then before that, it was called Billboard Live. So it changed hands over the years. But yeah, my very, very first show ever, I think I was 18 or 19 at the Whiskey A Go-Go was my very, very first Hollywood show.
Is that with a band called Back Alley Sally?
No, okay. They came later. No, this was a band before that. That whole Back Alley Sally thing and that album. Yeah, that was an indie release on a label from Canada called Big Bang Records. And I had joined that band. Man, I was still fairly young. And it was just so nuts because that was, again, back in the day, you had these magazines. You had Music Connection. Oh my God, what was the other one? You had Recycler. There was a couple different like rock magazines, like local publications, musicians seeking or musicians available ads. And so, you would call these ads and meet just a slew of crazy people and different bands. I don't know how I ended up with that Back Alley Sally gig, but I want to say it had something to do with the Music Connection. I want to say that, I called those guys up. And what was really crazy is when the record was being released, we had a couple different drummers come down at the time. And one of them was Simon Wright, who I think now plays with Dio. He played in AC/DC for a little while. And then he played in Rhino Bucket, which makes sense because AC/DC and Rhino Bucket are very, very similar. Yeah, it's weird. I was exposed to some pretty cool people at like an early age. But dude, I was so persistent. I'm sure I was a bit of a nag, but man, I was just calling people and hustling and playing in 3 or 4 bands at a time because I was bound and determined.
Where was your kind of headspace, though, moving down to Hollywood? I mean, what year would that be? Would it be like very late 80s?
Oh, no, it was like 91 turning 92.
Okay, so even more so then, what was you listening to at the time? Was you thinking, there's still chance for me to make something down in LA? Because I guess the hard rock thing was still big enough down there to run for another couple of years after that.
Yeah, it was kind of on its last legs, unfortunately. Like the shift was happening in the industry. And at that time, I moved down to LA. It was kind of weird, right? So it was more the Seattle sound. So Nirvana already hit. Alice in Chains was really starting to catch on. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood, Sex, Magic, the album I'm talking about, that was like at the top of the charts. So like as far as rock music was concerned, it was definitely on that downhill decline. So it was a little disheartening in the sense that I felt like, all this stuff that I've been playing for the past couple of years, it's kind of scarce.
Had you had a chance to see any of it in San Francisco? Because obviously you had bands like Jet Boy from San Francisco who would do gig swaps with GNR and Poison. Was you old enough to see them, or was that just afterwards?
I was lucky enough to see some of those shows in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, dude, what's really crazy, and this is some of our shared history, is I remember going to see the Bullet Boys right when... Shit, man. I don't know if it was at the tail end of the first record or if it was right when Freak Show came out. It was somewhere in that time frame. And I remember going to the Stone and seeing those guys play. So it was so crazy because we did the M3 festival this past July, right? And I ran into Mark and Lonnie in the elevator. They went on like, I don't know, it was like a band or two before us, but we were there and, I caught the set and it was the first time catching those guys with the original lineup. So when I saw them in the elevator, I was like, dude, I caught your set, sounded great. I'm so excited that you got the all original lineup back together. It's cool to see that happen, man, because, like anything, I think when you have the original guys back together, there's a certain magic, right? And there's definitely a certain sound to it. Obviously, Mark's had a bunch of different versions of that band over the years. Obviously, we had taken part in some of those incarnations of the band, which is cool, and had a great time. However, it's neat to see those 4 guys together because there is definitely a certain vibe and a sound, that those guys create together. So that was cool, man. And so I ran into them and obviously they're out doing their thing again. But I did catch them back in the day when I was a kid. I mean, dude, I couldn't even drive. I had to catch a ride with a buddy or somebody I knew to go to the show. But I would catch these bands like, I remember going to see them. I remember seeing LA Guns. I remember seeing a band called Tora Tora, which was another, 80s band. There was some package tour that was like LA Guns, Tora Tora, and somebody else. But it was cool to see those guys back in that day, in that element, because that was like really their starting ground too. They were out doing some of their first records. But again, it's weird, man. And I know I say this a lot. Eventually you go on to work with those artists that you grew up listening to or touring with those guys. I remember, listening to LA Guns a lot as a kid. Dude, I can't even count how many shows Tracy and I have done together over the years, whether it's LA Guns, Fast Twist Cat combination or Bang Tango and whoever, or like Enough's Enough, man. Chip and I played together for years and years with Steven, but before even all that, Chip and I had toured together with Enough's Enough and Bang Tango or Enough's Enough and Faster Pussycat. when we started doing the thing with Steven, it was interesting because I hadn't seen him in like a year or two, and we met up in Las Vegas for rehearsals. And, here's a guy that I've toured all over the world with, but never really kind of had the time in the same band and gel together. So it's so strange how that kind of stuff happens. And right? Because you listen to a lot of these guys, and then, eventually when they would come over to the UK, you always got tapped to like, hey man, we need a bass player. And so next thing you know, there you are out on tour, man, you're in the game doing it.
I'd do it in a heartbeat again. I'm still waiting for the call. It's going to be the week before like it normally is.
Well, think about like, okay, so all the UK tours that you and I did, but then outside of that, like I remember like doing some really cool gigs. We had done some cool stuff. We went into different countries like Spain, Italy, and there were a couple other cities, I want to say like in the Netherlands, where that we hit up as well. So, we put on a lot of miles in some pretty cool countries.
When you moved to Hollywood, was you listening to different stuff? Was you seeing a change in the music? Was you getting off on the different sounds that were coming in?
Yeah, I want to say like my music taste they've always been pretty eclectic, right? So I listen to a lot of different stuff. But, at that time, some of it was so left field, it really wasn't kind of in my wheelhouse. And not that I didn't appreciate it, but it was not like a direction I was going. So I'll give you an example. When I first moved down to LA, I lived in Long Beach. Long Beach, California is like maybe about 20 miles south of LA. And at that time, dude, there was this whole movement going on. You had bands like No Doubt, you had bands like Sublime, right? And it was this kind of Orange County ska punk scene going on. And I remember very clearly these shows happening at like these small venues in like the Long Beach area. I remember there was a hotel called like the Golden Sails or something, and they had some kind of venue there where like No Doubt and Sublime, they'd play all the time. So it was a weird time to be in LA. Dude, it was so polar opposite of everything I thought or expected. It was hard not to get a little disheartened because everything that the kind of music that you loved was not happening at the time. And I wasn't willing to kind of at that point think outside the box and go in any kind of ska punk direction. Not that I didn't appreciate the music, but it just wasn't particularly what I wanted to play. But yeah, that whole revolution was going on, dude. And talk about like a completely different scene.
Who was the first band guy you saw when you moved into Hollywood?
The first band guy I saw, well, okay, in LA, because I can tell you, like, here's what's really crazy. When I lived in the Bay Area, remember I was telling you I'd go to these shows and I would see like Jason Becker and Marty Friedman. So, dude, I remember being in high school and sometimes I would take this bus, like public transport. It's called the Golden Gate Transit. I would see Marty Friedman get on the bus with his guitar. And he would like ride the bus to wherever he was going. I don't know if it was rehearsals or the recording studio. There was a recording studio called the Record Planet in Sausalito, which actually you may be familiar with Davey Vane. Davey Vane has done a lot of sessions out of the Record Planet in Sausalito. And I just saw Davey, like it was right before lockdown. We played a show at the Whiskey with Steven. And Davey was there. And I hadn't seen him in a number of years. So it was really cool to see him. And he's still in the Bay Area from what I can recall. But Marty Friedman, dude, I would see him on the bus. Here's this dude with his long curly hair and these super tight black jeans on and his cowboy boots. Dude, he was rocking cowboy boots outside of the jeans with a big old guitar case, getting on the public transit bus to go wherever he was going. What's nuts is whatever it was, he was doing Cacophony at the time with Jason Becker. And then a couple years later, he'd go on to be in Megadeth and, help write and record some of their biggest stuff, man. So, yeah, it's crazy.
When you came actually down into Hollywood to make that move, who did you run into then?
Some of the first people I ran into, which is really weird, was I ran into Tammy Down years before we ever played together. As a matter of fact, I used to have these epic after parties at my house. When I moved down to Hollywood, again, the rock and roll shift, that was kind of going away. The whole Hollywood scene of like, the clubs and the decadence and the people handing flyers out on the strip. I mean, that had all really kind of come to a close, right? I caught the very, very, very sad tail end of it. So there was a long period of time where they'd be like these after parties. And like there'd be a lot of like little hidden places, kind of speakeasy places in Hollywood. And there was this one place called the Seven Seeds. There was a band called Blackboard Jungle, and they were kind of a bigger Hollywood band at the time. And they would go out on tour with Faster Pussycat a lot. I think maybe they rehearsed there as well. So when the bars closed down, at like 2:30, you would go down to the after party. And then, this underground club would be going till 10 a.m. the next day. That was a regular spot. So I remember running into the Blackboard Jungle guys there, obviously. Brent Muscat was doing some work with those guys, like producing. I think he produced their first release. I used to run into Tammy a lot at the Rainbow, which is really crazy, man, because like my hair is still pretty long, but I mean, back in the day, it was down to my waist. I looked way more goth than probably what I was, because I wasn't really a goth guy, but I had this super long black hair. I would run into Tammy and, we'd kind of talk in passing, or he would end up at one of my after parties. But we never really kind of knew each other. It was just kind of from the scene. And then I remember being at, say, that the Seven Seas after party and running into a couple of the guys from like Bang Tango. And I remember being a kid and listening to that record and really being influenced by that kind of stuff. Like Kyle was such a monster bass player. So I remember running into him, and fucking bizarre story. So I remember it was like probably 7, 8 in the morning. We were talking, hanging out, having drinks with Kyle. And he's like, hey, we're kind of getting finished with our third record. And it was the Love After Death album. And we went out to his car and he played us a couple of the unfinished tracks. And I remember just being like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Here I am in Hollywood, this kid. And now I'm like hearing this unreleased material from some of my favorite bands. Those guys were like, I remember specifically meeting them. And then one day I'd end up, playing with Joe and doing Beautiful Creatures and Bang Tango and all that stuff. At one point, those after parties kind of closed down, man. There wasn't as much going on. And I kind of took it upon myself to then throw the after party. And then like shit got out of control for a number of years, dude. Like number of years. I used to have these crazy parties like 5 nights a week.
Was you having to work a day job before things got moving?
Oh, yeah. I don't know how I kept it, but I was.
That's what I'm thinking.
Had to pay the rent, dude. Had to pay the rent. Yeah, it was nuts. Actually, at that time, I was working as a runner for a film production company. So during the day, I'd be like delivering scripts to all these like actors and actresses' house. I'd be going to like Universal, or I'd be going to MGM or Sony, like all these different like places to drop off checks, pick up scripts. Basically as a runner, you're just kind of here, there, and everywhere. And then every now and then I'd find some time to like sneak in a nap during the day. Then you'd get off work and then it would be like full bore. You'd be out at the clubs, you'd be out drinking, you'd be out at shows, and then you'd be doing it all till like 4 or 5 in the morning, and then catching like a cat nap, and then off to work you go. So, dude, those were nutty times, dude. I tell some of these stories, and it still feels surreal to me because I think about all this shit that went on. And literally, I still have scars from some of those nights. I remember doing stupid shit when you're drunk and, climbing up on shit, falling out of trees, and all sorts of nutty stuff. Man, those parties were epic. And that's where, I met a lot of people. Another weird connection at those parties that we used to have, I ran into recently. Okay, so we played the Rainbow Backyard Bash about 3-4 weeks ago. We had a bunch of people back at our tour manager's house, and I ran into a buddy of mine, Bjorn, who's the bass player for Yngwie Malmsteen. He does the Dio thing. I mean, just phenomenal bass player. But we knew each other literally like kids. He was going to like MIT, I think at the time. Neither of us had really done anything notably in music, but we had this circle of friends. And every weekend they were either at my house or we were at their house, just throwing these epic parties, right? So when I saw him for the first time in probably 15 years, after that show a couple of weeks ago, it was so crazy. And we were just talking and reminiscing about all this crazy stuff, right? So he was kind of in the same boat as me where, he eventually worked his way into the music scene and then, ended up playing for some pretty notable guys, touring around the world. I mean, when you're the bass player for Yngwie Malmsteen, pretty awesome.
People probably know you got some thick skin if you've made it through a tour with Yngwie as well.
Right.
Did GIT ever interest you? Was you ever interested in going down that route, or was you more I just want to get into band and tour?
Honestly, so my outtake on music was I'm very much a creative person, whether it's music or art or writing. Even as like a young kid, I always felt that was like really kind of a personal expression. So places like GIT or MIT never interested me in attending, say, going to school for that kind of stuff. Like I had a guitar teacher, learn the basics, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I started training my ear, and I just started learning like every album that I had available at my disposal, every CD, every tape. Just because as a kid, you don't have buddies who maybe play the drums or could play drums in time, right? And so the best teacher was playing along with the bands that you love listening to. And so I literally learned, I don't know, every album I had from start to finish. And it trained my ear so I could pick stuff out pretty quickly. But then it also taught me timing. It taught me melody. It taught me so much.
Did you ever learn the Bang Tango albums, top to bottom? The first two?
What's funny is I did learn a few of those songs. Yeah, I totally did. Again, it's weird, man. I mean, Faster Pussycat and all those guys. Like, I remember, being a 15-year-old kid or 14-year-old kid. I had a band at the time, and it was like half originals, half covers. And I remember, I don't know which song it was. Maybe it was Babylon or it was Bathroom Wall. Was one of the covers that we did, And I remember playing at this school auditorium, doing this big show, playing one of those songs, man. To me, again, it was more about personal expression. I think it's great that those schools exist. However, I think you're going to walk out with the same knowledge as the guy sitting next to you. And it's great if you want to be like a studio musician, but even studio musician gigs are like they're a dime a dozen. So it's a lot of people that know all the same stuff. And so I'm sure it's just like, a rat race, clawing your way into that gig or that session, right? I just always wanted to do my own thing. I've always loved those guitar players that the minute you hear them play, you know exactly who it is, and there are players like, Slash, obviously, Joe Perry, Angus Young, Lenny Kravitz. It's like when you hear their music, you hear them play, you can identify who that artist is without anybody telling you who it is. I feel like if you can emulate a voice, your own voice through your instrument, that's one of the greatest achievements. I think that's timeless. That's your stamp on something. And, there are certain guitar players. I mean, when you listen to these guys, like I think Dave Navarro did a fabulous job with Jane's Addiction and cementing his own identity in the style of that music because it's just so original, right? So that always fascinated me more than learning to play, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but kind of robotically, right? Learning scales, doing this. Okay, great.
Given the handbook.
Yeah, it's such a handbook situation. And that's great if that's what you're interested in. Like, I'm not knocking it. But for me, it's weird. I was telling this story the other day about John Mellencamp. Obviously he's like kind of Americana folk hero. He was on his way to New York to become a painter. He was an art student when he got his record deal. Like, music really wasn't on his radar. And he became this huge music icon. And throughout the course of his career, he kind of like pushed back on that whole idea of being like, a star. And he has a very famous song, I don't never want to be a pop singer. I think the song is called Pop Singer. And so he caught some backlash in the industry because he was kind of rejecting all that. And what I really thought was super interesting and unique about his take on music was he said, I was never interested in touring or the fame that kind of came with that whole thing. He goes, I look at it like painting. Like, if I painted this piece of art, why would I want to paint that again? I want to move on to the next thing. He never had an interest in recreating the original piece of art. So when you think about touring, you really are recreating that night after night after night after night. And that never really held any fascination for him. So I really love that take on it because I think it's such a creative way of looking at it, right? So I understand what he's saying, not in the sense of like not wanting to tour, because I love playing live. Like, that's one of my greatest joys in life, is being on stage. However, when you look at it from a GIT or MIT standpoint, I wouldn't want to paint that same scale over and over. I wouldn't want to paint the same thing somebody else is painting. I much rather would create my own stuff. And that's where I kind of feel like the work that I've done for other artists, or when I do get calls for gigs, like I've done a lot of studio work, especially during the lockdown thing. I got really lucky and did a lot of creative stuff for like different film soundtracks and different artists, where it was a definite huge different combination of music. I did one song for this horror movie that Corey Taylor is in. It's a new one that's coming out, and I don't think it's been released yet. I did a collaboration on a song with my old singer from Engines of Aggression, and it was like this really super heavy riff. When I talk about doing the guitar shred thing, that was like the first opportunity that I had in a while to really just cut loose and go bananas, like on the guitar solos. And I absolutely love it. It's so brutal, it's so heavy, and there's so much cool, fast shredding on that track. And then I did another session like a month later that was the complete opposite. It was like this really light acoustic title song for a soundtrack for this movie, completely different type of vocalist, completely different type of style. And so like, I love the variety of being pulled into all these different things because again, it's not kind of recreating the same piece of art. It's the diversity.
You mentioned the band Engines of Aggression. So all the music scenes change a little bit. Then this band comes on with this like really modern sound. How did they hear about you and you got that gig? Because was it on their second album that you got the call up for them?
Yeah, it was on the second album. They had put out their initial release on Priority Records. It was cool, man. Like, you know, when I heard their stuff, it really caught my ear and I was very interested in doing the project. And at that time, the singer was kind of revamping the band. We had the original bass player, but we brought in a new drummer and obviously I was a new element that came in. And what I loved about that, it was heavy, but there was these organic elements, right? So I felt like it was like a mixture of Nine Inch Nails meets Jane's Addiction. There were some really organic guitar parts, but there was some very heavy industrial sequence stuff going on in the background. That was really super creative and it caught my ear. That was another one of those things. Dude, so Music Connection, Recycler, all those magazines at the time in LA, that was an ad that I answered. You know, I constantly scanned those ads on a regular basis. I ended up going in and meeting the singer and doing an audition and getting that gig. And, you know, Engines of Aggression, that was the very first band that I toured Japan with.
Had you done much actual touring before that point?
I mean, local stuff, like as far as the West Coast. And it was odd because around that same time, it's so weird, dude. I had gotten the gig with Stevie Rochelle, which was my first kind of like real proper US touring situation. Yeah, it was all kind of intermingled. And I remember I was doing the thing with Stevie. I was kind of at that time closing out the Engine stuff because we had recorded a bunch of new material. We had worked with some people in the industry, which was awesome. We worked with a couple of different producers and engineers that had worked with, you know, those bands like Jane's and with Nine Inch Nails. And we were in studios like El Dorado Studios in Burbank, where Jane's had done their stuff and tracking in these rooms with these guys who had worked on those albums. So that was a super amazing experience at that point of my musical journey. And then I ended up answering another ad and getting that gig with Stevie, who obviously, you know.
How familiar was you with Tuff? Was you a fan of that kind of last wave of hard rock bands that got the push on MTV? Was you into any of those?
Honestly, dude, I wasn't familiar with the material. Like I knew the name, I knew the band name, but I couldn't tell you at that time one of their songs. And so it was just by kind of chance that I got that gig. It was funny because their drummer had seen me play, you know, Todd Burr, obviously. Todd had seen me play with Engines of Aggression. And when they were looking for guitar players, my name kind of fell into the hat. Anyways, I was talking with Stevie. We had set up a time to get together and he was going to, you know, play me some of the music and we were going to talk about what he had going on. And like literally like 2 days later, he called me back and he said, "Hey, dude," he goes, "Listen, I really enjoyed talking with you." He goes, "I think we got the guy for the gig, but I just want to let you know, hey, I appreciate the time." It was somebody that a photographer had called Stevie about. And I don't know if it was like Mark Weiss or like Glenn LaFerman, but it was somebody, some photographer. I can't remember who exactly. So anyways, long story short, I'm like, "All right, dude, well, hey, best of luck to you." I guess they had this guy down. He came in and I guess he just was not the guy. It went terribly bad. And like Stevie called me a couple of days after and he's like, "Hey man, you know who this is?" And you know Stevie, like you've dealt with Stevie before, right? And he's kind of joking around. I'm like, "I have no idea who this is." And I'm like, literally, I'm on my way out the door to go to this beach party. And I'm kind of thinking like, "All right, dude, let's wrap this up. Who is this? I got shit to do." And he's like, "Hey man, well, it's Stevie Rochelle. Are you surprised to hear from me?" And I'm like, "All right, dude, come on, let's get this going." I got cocktails waiting and, you know, a killer beach party that I'm on my way to. And anyways, he goes, "Listen, we had the guy down and it didn't work out." He's like, "I'm really interested in talking more with you." So literally he convinced me to get together with him that afternoon and I blew off the beach party. He gave me a couple CDs and he's like, "Okay, well, like learn 3 songs and then let's get in the studio and jam." And I'm like, "Cool." I'm like, "When do you want to get together?" And he's like, "I'll be back in 4 hours." And I'm like, "Seriously, dude?"
Oh,
so I ended up learning like 3 of their tunes and literally 3.5 hours later, he came by the house. We put my gear in his truck and we went down to the studio. And then I got the gig. I mean, a couple of days later, we did the House of Blues with Vince Neil. The next night we did the Viper Room, and then the very next day we were on a plane and we were off to do the Midwest tour.
Did you come to the UK with Stevie? Because didn't you do a live album with him?
I did. My very, very first tour of the UK was with Tough and Stevie. Yes, and we did do a live album in the UK. And what was crazy was at the time it was Todd Burr and my buddy Brian Saunders, who had played with a couple of different bands like Hair of the Dog, which is another 80s band. He filled in for Dokken. He did a band called F5 with Dave Ellefson from Megadeth and a few other guys. And, he was my partner in crime. I mean, literally, I remember we got to the UK, man, and it was our very first time going over and touring. Literally, we drank from the time we got to the airport, the entire flight over, and we got off that plane like super sideways. And we showed up to like customs and we didn't have our work visas or anything kind of sorted out. We were all disheveled and half drunk. And I remember the lady, the customs agent, looking at me and saying, we do not have to let you into our country. And I was like, oh shit. And then all of a sudden, Stevie came up behind the two of us. This big hand slaps these papers down on the desk and he just grabs us by the back of the shirt and like pulls us away. He was not happy with us. That's how we started that tour.
Stevie probably had about 6 suitcases full of merch.
Yeah, at least 6 suitcases full of merch. But it was a blast, man. I think one of the first shows that we played was Nottingham Rock City.
I'd have been at that show.
Yeah, so I mean, dude, it was a blast. But my very, very first tour of the UK was with Stevie.
That's wicked, man. That's wicked. And you went on to do the Fastback album with Brian, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is that not up on Spotify or iTunes? You need to get it up there.
I need to, man. Dude, it's so weird that you say that because I was so like last weekend, we were in, God, where were we? Detroit, and then we were in Ohio. And at the Ohio show, the meet and greet, somebody came up with a Fastback CD to have me sign. I guess they had found it, maybe on, I don't know, eBay or something like that. But they are kind of hard to find, which I like. I like that it's almost kind of like a collector's thing. It's not readily available. But it was so cool to see somebody bring that. And of course, I signed it and took a picture and I sent it to Brian. I said, hey, look what turned up at the meet and greet tonight. So I'm always amazed that, people, ask me about that and show up with these CDs and super cool, man. I mean, that was a really gratifying experience because I did do that with Brian and I had recorded that after my very first tour with Steven. I came home from that European tour and I just kind of set aside 3 months to write, record, mix, and master that album and get it out the door. And it was an incredible learning experience because I had never done anything that extensive, from start to finish. So it really laid the groundwork for a lot of like the stuff that I did later as far as learning how to record, and the whole digital element and mixing and really kind of fine tuning stuff. It was so immersive. I mean, that's all I did every day for a couple months until I got that record finished. I was just bound and determined, man. I put dates on the calendar. I was like, gonna have this done by this day, gonna do this. And then in between, when I got tired of recording or I had to give my ears a break, I would just start working on the album artwork. I'd switch over to doing that stuff.
Where does your work ethic come from? Like I said earlier, you and Todd Kearns in the same band together, two of the most professional guys I've known. Where does your work ethic come from? Because you are incredibly focused.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. It's one of these things where I just like to stay busy, man. The whole process of creating to me is so cool and, seeing a vision through. Again, it's probably more just being stubborn than anything else. Like once I start something, I got to see it through.
What was you like at school? Was you like that at school?
Well, I honestly, when it came to like academics, no, dude, not so much. I got to be honest. I was always daydreaming. I was always that kid at the back of the class, like daydreaming about playing guitar or being on tour or doing other things than being there. I had a real problem with focus. I mean, I can tune out like that, man. It's crazy. I perfected that art, no doubt. I can tune out at the drop of a hat. I think some of the work ethic really comes from my family. My mom has 3 brothers, and one's an incredible architect. One is a notable lawyer who ran for governor of Florida. The other is a neurologist and has done a lot of amazing work on Parkinson's disease. So I see these really great pillars, examples. And, my mom's amazing as well. And, did her own thing in her career and business. So I guess I was kind of surrounded by this heavy work ethic. I think that's probably what, rubbed off on me, which is awesome.
It is good because, here's you like, I'm going to plug myself into the most ramshackle, unpredictable business there is. I best do a good job at it.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you know how crazy music is, right? Like there is no stability whatsoever. And I think knowing that, you just got to hustle even more. So that's going to really drive home that work ethic, because if you don't stay on top of it, you're just going to sit at home, right? So you got to really beat the pavement. You got to really work hard.
For sure. And I think it was around 2004 when you originally began your relationship with Steven Adler, because you were originally filling in for Kerry Kelly, but whilst the band has been on a bit of a hiatus, you've been pretty much that guy all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty constant. There was a hiatus that we took from like 2012 to like 17, like a 5-year break. Steven went on to do some solo music for himself. I did, those records with Anchored and Brand New Machine, and started working with some different artists too, from like The Voice and American Idol. Ended up going over to Europe and doing some tracks over there, some touring over there with some of those folks. So yeah, I had a real kind of mixed bag of work during that hiatus.
How is it being suddenly plugged into like a different kind of music machine, such as the pop machine? Did you like that?
Oh, I loved it, dude. I loved it. Yeah. And I'll have to send you a couple of these tracks that I did. It's so pop, it'll blow your mind. You'll be like, that's like Radio Disney. What is this all about? I love it, man, because the weird thing is I write so many different styles. Sometimes I'll write music and I don't even know what I'm going to use it for. But then eventually I'll go back in my catalog of stuff and I'll be like, oh, this will be perfect for this. The very first song I wrote for Danique Vanderville from The Voice was this more pop rock track. But the initial incarnation of that song I had like from 7 years earlier. And I just kind of recorded a snippet of it and then put it away. And I came back across it and I was like, oh my God, this would be perfect for her. Or like literally like a couple months ago, a buddy of mine is doing a new YouTube show, and it's focused around wine and these new companies who are coming out with like wine in a can, right? It's becoming very popular, right? So he's doing these reviews and doing these interviews with these different owners of companies and doing like, tastings and stuff. And he came to me and said, man, I need you to record me like an intro for my show. I was like, well, I got a bunch of stuff cataloged. I said, come by my house. We'll listen to a few things. If you find something you like, I'll send you home with a track. And so we did that. And we came across this like super heavy, really melodic, almost kind of like Avenged Sevenfold meets kind of Slipknot kind of tune. I had recorded it literally 10 years ago, and it was just living on my hard drive. And he fell in love with it. He went home with it, and his editor cut it into the opening of the show. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So I write so many different types of styles that, I love the variety. So when I was doing that pop stuff, how did I like it? Dude, I loved it. I loved it. And then, I got a chance to record in some really cool studios in Amsterdam and different areas of the Netherlands. We did some tracking at, I think it was called Visselord Studios. And that's where like Rammstein had done a lot of their albums. Whitesnake had done a lot of their stuff. I think Adrian Vandenberg still records there. So I'm like sitting there, and it's like this crazy, almost like, looks like a bunker kind of facility. Big, heavy concrete walls with this beautiful, beautiful place. And then there's all these albums on the wall of these artists that have recorded there. And I'm like, holy shit, like this is the real deal, And dude, they had these amazing like tracking rooms. And then like this different rooms of like vintage gear, like these amazing amplifiers that, from modern to like years and years ago, stuff like one of a kind things that you just can't find anymore. So that was amazing. It was really amazing.
Was you ever expecting to get the call from Steven Adler again after that hiatus?
So that reminds me, that's where we started. Circling back. So yeah, for Steven, it was funny because Kerry Kelly was playing guitar for him. And then Robbie Crane from Rat, and then he played with Vince Neil for a number of years. He had called me and asked me to come in and fill in for Kerry. So that was my intro to working with Steven. And what's crazy, man, is I saw Robbie not too long ago. He's actually out touring with Warrant. But what's super crazy was a buddy of mine, Ryan Seelbach, is the guitar tech for Night Ranger. They happened to be in town doing a corporate gig, and I was about to go downtown and kind of hang out. It was Sunday afternoon, and my phone rings, and it's Ryan, and he says, "Hey, man, I'm in Dallas, kind of a last minute corporate gig. Let's grab a drink." So I was like, "Great. Meet me downtown." So I ended up going downtown and meeting him and Carrie, because Carrie plays guitar for Night Ranger now. So it was cool, man. We hit up this really great bar that a buddy of mine owns in Deep Ellum called the Green Room. And we sat up on the rooftop patio and had a couple cocktails and had a chance to hang out and catch up. It's funny that you bring up Carrie's name, because I hadn't seen him or really kind of hung out and talked with him in a number of years. And of course, he and I have had some similar gigs together. So got a chance to hang out with Ryan and Carrie and catch up. But yeah, I came in when Carrie went to go work with Vince. And then it's pretty much been Steven and I, except for that hiatus since then. And what's really nuts is I had this conversation just recently. Out of all the artists that I've worked with and I've toured with, Steven as well, if you think about his career, Steven and I have probably done the most shows together and traveled the most miles together. I mean, we've done Europe a number of times, South America a number of times, more US tours than I can count, Australia. He and I have traveled and played together the most out of all of our bands, out of all the musicians that we worked with. When you add up those shows and those miles, no doubt that he and I have played together the most out of everyone else that we've collaborated with.
Do you remember buying Appetite for Destruction back in the day?
Oh, absolutely, dude. Absolutely.
Where'd you get it from?
Well, so a buddy of mine had the album, and it was almost a little terrifying. Like, you see this album and these guys that they just reeked of like rock and roll and heroin, right? Like, it was so dangerous and dirty and cool. Like, should I have this record? Should I be holding this at this age? Because, dude, I was like 11 or 12 or something. I was, and back in the day, they had these things that was called like Columbia House, and you could order like 10 albums for a penny, but you had to buy like 6 more by the end of the year. So anyways, this is one of those kind of scam deals, but that was one of the first albums that I picked up through that Columbia record company thing.
One thing we haven't spoke about, but I want to touch on it quickly. Your first gig, if I got this right, was Dio, Y&T, and Dokken at the Cow Palace on New Year's Eve, 1983, right? Mm-hmm. And you went with a friend, and I quote, "is hot rocker mom."
Yeah.
So I need to know more about that.
Yeah, no, dude, 100%. Yeah, that is true. That was my first rock concert ever. Man, so yeah, New Year's Eve, Cow Palace, San Francisco. But do you want to hear the craziest part about that story? I went with my buddy and his hot rocker mom. It was an amazing experience, especially, being so young and being in this stadium experiencing this rock show, right? So Dokken was the opener, and it was their Breaking the Chains, like their first record. It was the Dio Holy Diver tour. So the middle band was Y&T, and Y&T was from the Bay Area. So they were like the hometown favorites, right? Okay, so I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm sitting with my manager at the time, and it was the same guy who called me about the Brand New Machine gig. And I don't know what we were doing. We were having dinner or having cocktails or something. And we started talking about, hey, what was your first concert? So I had mentioned, my first concert was the Dio Holy Diver tour. And it was Y&T and Dokken at the Cow Palace New Year's Eve. And he gets real quiet and he looks at me and he goes, "Really?" And I go, yeah. I was like, whatever, 83. And he goes, "I was Y&T's drum tech for that show." He goes, "I was sitting backstage." And I'm like, no way. So imagine here I am, like this 10-year-old kid watching this show, and the guy setting up the drums, hanging out backstage, would eventually be my manager X amount of years later. Like, dude, how crazy is that, right?
I've got one for you, a similar one to that. I mean, you've probably done a million gigs with Ted Poley and Danger over the years.
Oh, yeah.
You probably know all them. I mean, I used to be a massive Danger fan. And after he left Danger, he had a band called Bone Machine. And they were doing the debut UK tour. So I was like, all about Ted Poley was my favorite member of the band. So we went to, did you ever play Bradford Rios?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, here's a great story, short story. I played the very last show at Bradford Rios.
Who with? Who was you playing with at that time?
It was Love Hate, Bang Tango, and your boy Christy Majors from Pretty Boy Floyd.
No way.
I played in all 3 bands.
You closed it down.
Okay, so that was my understanding. That was the very last show they had there. And they were already, like, the place was kind of shutting down. And there was like drywall and weird stuff exposed everywhere. from my understanding, that was supposed to be the last gig at Rio Bradford's. Rio Bradford's was the very first place that I ever drank absinthe.
Amazing. Well, Bradford Rio's, it's about best part of 2 hours north of Nottingham. So I was like, oh, I'm going to drive there. I've not been there very often, but we drove up there, me and my friend, straight down the front for Ted Poley. Was there front row for the whole gig, loved it. And this was back in the day where you used to hang around and try and get autographs and all that kind of stuff. So we hung around, Ted came out, all got autographs. And there was about maybe a dozen people waiting. And someone said, oh, let's take a photo in front of the pool table. So there's this photo of me and my friend Ted and probably about a dozen other people. Fast forward 20 years, I joined the band Teenage Casket Company.
Yeah, I love that band. I remember that band.
Yeah, with Rob Wild, the singer. We get talking. Oh, did you ever go and see Bone Machine? Oh, yeah, I went to see him at Bradford Rio's. I was like, no way. Where was you? He's like, oh, I was in the front row. I was like, you're kidding me. And did you stay around for autographs? Later says, yeah. And he was in that photograph.
Dude.
I don't know who's got the photo. I've never seen it. But then apparently there was two other guys who Rob was in a band with who didn't know at the time at that same gig.
Awesome.
And we're all in this photograph. I would love to see it. It's crazy. It's weird how all these things kind of happen.
Dude, it's so bizarre. I mean, your whole photograph story, right? So apparently, like, I had rolled through Texas a number of times with like Faster Pussycat and Steven Adler. A very, very good friend of mine, my bass player from Brand New Machine, his name is Wiley Oliver. He was telling me a story. He's like, oh, yeah, we have a picture together. I'm like, picture together? He goes, yeah, my wife and I came out to see you play with so-and-so, and you have a picture with my wife, and there's a picture of like the three of us. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, get out of here. He goes, yeah, I've got a picture. It's like before we knew each other and became very, very close friends. Yeah, there's a picture of us all hanging out. It's weird how that happens, right?
Nuts, man, nuts. Just kind of bring things to a close. I mean, you've since moved away from Hollywood and you're now in Texas. I know you say you go back there quite a bit. Is there anything you particularly miss, or are you getting just enough of it? You're going backwards and forwards?
As far as what I miss from LA, it's the scenery, like I love seeing the mountains. I love that, in 20 minutes, you can be at the beach, you can be in the mountains, or you can be in the desert. That's an amazing option. But, here's the thing too, man, it's really weird. And I say this a lot. Whenever I go to LA, I really appreciate coming back to Dallas, because as much as I love LA and it'll always be my home, there is an element of like kind of, I don't know what the right word is. It's a little dirty. There's definitely an element of like grime to it. I don't know. I come back to Dallas and it's almost like fresh green trees, and it's clean, it's beautiful, and there's such a community vibe here, man. You can go out 7 nights a week and everything's going to be packed. There's so many great areas. Like this morning, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I got up early, went down to the farmer's market, and they have all this like great food and artwork and live music. It's so amazing. It's such a community vibe here. People are really friendly. No matter where I go, I'm always meeting new, interesting people. I feel LA is a little more closed off. LA is a melting pot of transplants. Everybody goes there because they're trying to, 9 times out of 10, break into some element of the entertainment industry. So it's very kind of dog eat dog, a little more kind of cutthroat. Everybody plays everything a little closer to the vest. They're not as warm or open. Here, there's no real ulterior motives. Everybody's just living their best life. So I feel like you get that in return. So you go out and, everybody's real open and friendly, and there's so much going on here that I always appreciate coming home when I'm in LA. And also, since I bought the house last year, it's really nice to come back to this sanctuary, because I've really made this house very much me, from just the layout and the furniture and the artwork. And it's a really wonderful vibe. So I love coming home and being in my element here. And it's a very creative element as well. Like, I do a lot of work out of my home studio. So yeah, it's cool, man. Like, I really love Dallas. It's been a really good move for me personally.
Sweet, man. Sweet. Michael, thanks ever so much, mate, for doing this. I've loved catching up with you.
Oh, dude, I can't believe we haven't done this sooner,
Tell Todd I said hi next time you see him. When's your next show?
So we have some time off right now for October and November. So we just finished our last weekend of shows last weekend. And I think they're working on a New Year's thing and maybe some shows towards the end of the year.
She did something in Vegas, right? On Fremont Street.
Dude, that Fremont Street show was crazy. Did you see the photo? Yeah. I heard the count was 14,700 or something. There was close to 15,000 people there. It was nuts.
Where did they put you up? Where was you staying?
Right there, as a matter of fact, at the D Hotel. So it was awesome because I literally just took the elevator down, walked right outside, and the stage was right there. Couldn't have been more convenient.
Shit. Oh, man. Treated like a god.
I know. I definitely do not deserve that treatment. I don't know how I got so lucky, especially now, like, we got Todd involved in the band and, playing in front of this crazy crowd. I mean, all the shows, man, the turnouts have been so great. I just think like because people have been kind of, obviously at home, tucked away because of the whole lockdown situation, the enthusiasm for live music has just come roaring back. So it's been awesome to see. And it's been awesome to have, that interaction again, man, because I tell you what, last year, that was tough for everybody.
Well, I'll let you go, Michael, but keep in touch.
All right, bud. Great catching up with you.
You take it easy, mate. Speak to you soon.
You too, bud. Good to see you.
Massive thanks to the awesome Michael Thomas for such a fun chat here on the Straight to Video podcast. I'm sure his enthusiasm and passion for everything he does shone through in that chat, and what a top guy he is. As mentioned, please visit michaelthomas19.com or on Facebook and Twitter, both of which are michaelthomas19, or on Instagram too, which is at It's Michael Thomas. For over 100 more episodes of this podcast, they can all be found at stvpod.com, along with some fun music videos and merch. And don't forget, if you can, to check out all the exclusive perks available on our Patreon page at patreon.com/stvpod. I would love to have you on board over there. Alright, that's all for this episode. Thanks so much for the continued comments, shares, and just interest and support of this show. Feels great to know you're enjoying it and keep returning back for more. So until we do it all again, take care and speak soon.